What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are talking about the enhanced games. It's just happened this past weekend, or at the point of listening to this, the weekend before. And that is, I don't know if the long term listeners, you might remember us talking about this, where they're going to basically create a new category and make it rival the long standing Olympics, but allow the use of steroids. So the first official enhanced games kicked off just past last weekend, and it was very, very interesting. And I thought it's a really good topic to talk about. There's lots to cover off actually in this. A lot of arguments for, a lot of arguments against. But there's a few takeaways that I want to communicate and get across on the podcast. But if you don't know what the enhanced games is, it's simply that. Going back maybe a couple of years, there's a bit of an argument made that, well, let's kind of start back. Like, there's always a bit of shade thrown that these top Olympic athletes, as they keep breaking world record after world record, that they are in fact using steroids. And I think this stat that I guess the quote from the one of the founders who is running the enhanced games, he believes that 50% of male sprinting athletes 50% of the male athletes in that compete in the Olympic are actually doing some sort of doping. So it's no shot in the dark to say that there is a bit of anabolics used to enhance people's performance. I mean, there's a lot of people being busted. They do get randomly drug tested throughout the year. They can show up at any of your place, no matter where you stay. But there's still going to be compounds that people end up taking that don't exactly test on the radar. And this is probably true in some of the sports that you've seen Olympics or the world record not being broken in more recent years as technology's got better from the testing that we can do to see if someone is enhanced or not. Then, like, those old school records, which one we're going to talk today is about the 50-meter freestyle swimming relay. It's not been broken since 2009, whereas there is a lot of other records out there where as the sports evolved, things have got more, or records have been broken. So it's an interesting debate, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the Enhanced Games was founded by an Australian entrepreneur by the name of Dr. Aaron Dessers. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And he managed to raise a lot of funding from the likes of like Donald Trump Jr. and all that. So really high profile CEOs, entrepreneurs, investors. He managed to get a lot of backing for this. And his idea was that he wants to challenge the traditional sort of Olympic ruling, where athletes aren't looked after. Athletes that are choosing to do or are choosing to use anabolics or enhance their performance through using any sort of drug are actually worse off because they have to use compounds that hasn't been tested. We don't have as much research about. And then also the other part is the care, from a healthcare side of things, but also a welfare side of things as well. And the last one, which is very interesting, is this whole debate around those who are performers. Like, we watch sports, for example, athletes in the Olympics don't get paid that much at all. Even if you are winning gold medal, it's usually backed by, or usually the profits come from endorsements, come from sponsorships. It doesn't actually come from the Olympic Committee themselves, which is quite sad when you think about it. It's them that's pushing the boundaries. So he has raised all this and has been making a lot of noise over the last couple of years, saying that they're aiming for the official enhanced Olympic Games to kick off, where they have swimming, track and field, weightlifting, etc. So this past weekend, so since this, there's been a lot of noise and a lot of actual pushback from ex-Olympians, ex-Olympian coaches, the mainstream news outlets like BBC and all that sort of stuff, right? So a lot of pushback on it. But I think there is something to be said about creating, I guess, an uncapped market. And the comparison I'm going to make to this is going to be on bodybuilding. We don't call it enhanced bodybuilding, it's just bodybuilding. And then we have natural bodybuilding, two completely separate categories that have two completely separate, distinct looks. And the market tends to dictate which one becomes more popular. As human beings, We seek the freaks of nature. We want to see records broken. We want to see these mass monsters. We want to see people push the limits when it comes to their physique, and more importantly, when it comes to the Olympics, pushing the sports side of things as well. Time will tell with this, but I'll kind of circle back to my points at the end, because I want to raise, like, what is the common arguments for it and what is the common arguments against this, and we'll run through it together. So whether you're for or against this, I think it's still an interesting topic to cover off. It's interesting to give you some different points of view, maybe. But where I want to start with this is what's happened this past weekend, right? So this past weekend, backing up a little bit, they've released, the Enhanced Games has released it's about a 60-minute documentary on the most recent attempt to break a world record that hadn't been broken since 2009. And they've done a fantastic job. Great documentary. Any sort of sports documentary always gets me fired up. But what you had here was an Australian chap called James Magnussen, right? He was an Olympic swimmer and done pretty well, pretty reasonable, but he had been retired for about 7 years. Now, there was an Australian podcast that kicked off and they were talking about this, how that can you take any high school professional and juice them up, get them jacked up, and then they can break world records. And one of the podcast hosts knew this guy, James, who was an Olympic athlete and competed at a high level. And they decided to phone him up. And on the phone call, live on the podcast, it sort of went viral, where he was like, look, give me $1 million and I'll break that fucking record. Like, I will do it. I'll juice I think he said he'll juice himself to the gills and he'll break the current world record. So this is where the whole debate comes from, right? Does performance enhancing drugs just flick a switch and make a dramatic change to everyone's performance? And obviously, on the front of it, the answer is yes, but there's a little bit more complications or different things to consider when you decide, or if you decide, to take performance enhancement drugs to improve your performance in the gym, physically, or the sport that you're competing in. So this is where I believe there's going to be a shakedown from, like, a variety of other sports that come off the back of this, not just the Olympics, etc., etc. But essentially, the Enhanced Games in the documentary, I don't want to talk too much about the documentary because I honestly recommend everyone goes and watches it. I'll link it below. But essentially, they call him up and they have a kind of discussion, and they're like, "Look, let's fucking do this. If you're happy enough to do it, let's get you I think the top swimming coach ended up getting drafted in for this as well, who had worked with this chap James before, and off they went. So this guy hadn't competed in, I want to say, was it 7 years? Yeah. So when it got around to April 2025, the last time this guy competed was 7 years prior to this, okay? So he's 7 years out of his training structure, and he touches on this on the documentary that he sort of lost his purpose and his drive to swim. So it wasn't as if he's been keeping this up. And what they done, they took this guy, and through the right medical care, through all the legalized drugs that we have backed by or approved by the FDA and all the regulatory systems or whatnot, they start to put him on performance enhancing drugs. And it's worth noting here that this is only a 12-week block, right? So in the space of 12 weeks, they're trying to get someone from, I guess, deconditioned, I guess to say would be the right word, that's out this world. But the argument that James is trying to make here, that you can't just put a young buck, fill them with a bunch of drugs and expect him to perform well. There's a level of experience, there's a level of exposure to doing a variety of competitions, and he believed that athlete would be better than someone who's just fresh out the gates. So I think he's at the age of 33 at this point, right? 32, 33, been out the game, stepped away from it. One of his last times, I think, on a similar relay was about 23 seconds or something, right? So the previous record on this was 20.91 seconds, and that was done in 2009. So they draft this guy in, and they go, right, let's start putting you on performance enhancement drugs. They're getting his blood work, his ECG. He's doing a variety of different health tests throughout the week, throughout the month, then with a variety of different checkups to make sure that everything is done safely. And he starts training. He starts training hard. But I need to throw up a picture or a snippet from that video here, right? This guy gets jacked, right? He gets absolutely, like, he mentions this in it, like, he ends up swimming at 252 pounds. 252 pounds, like 115 or 114 kilos roughly. And to put it into perspective, right, The average elite 50-meter freestyle swimmer is around 74 kilos, right? So this guy is not quite double, but he's got an extra 50 kilo of lean body mass on him, right? And when you look at the picture, he becomes a bodybuilder. And I don't know if this is probably it's going to be the hardest thing, and the very interesting dynamic of what drugs do they end up using. Because just putting on like things like testosterone or any performance enhancing drug, you're going to have individuals who respond really well to that compound and then pack on a shit ton of muscle, because what they're doing, they're training twice a day, they're doing a lot of volume, and they're recovering quickly, and then they can push their volume even more. That's essentially what these drugs are doing. So this guy gets absolutely jacked. He looks like insane. He literally looks like he could step on stage, right? Now, don't get me wrong, he's not like ultra peeled and that sort of stuff, but he gets jacked. So ends up weighing in at 252 pounds. It gets to the day where they're going, right, this isn't, I don't know if they were making this an official record, because he's not competing against anyone else just now. The idea behind doing this sort of publicity stunt or documentary series is to make it real that here we are onto something, and there's a lot of people that are interested in seeing what is the possibilities with the I guess the modern age of pharmaceuticals and drugs that we can use to improve our performance. Where does that cap end up? So you have someone who is one, genetically gifted from the sport that they have done their whole lives. On the second hand, you've got someone who is also put in their whole life dedicated towards swimming, working their way through high school to all the way through the regional championships, all the way up to the Olympics, and been in that world for, what did he say, like 25 years of his life or 20 years of his life. So you've got that experience combined with already a genetic freak, and then you're going to see, right, what marginal difference can we make by including these performance enhancement drugs. So James is training for about 3 months, right, and then it gets to the D-date. So the 3-month block, they're looking to peak him for this event. He's gaining a lot of mass, he's gaining a lot of size. He's even saying it himself that he's feeling heavier in the water. Now James's previous record was something like 22 seconds something, so his best ever time was about 2 seconds off. Now, when he goes for his his best ever time was 21 seconds 52 in the 2013 championships. So with that being said, he's been out the game, what we on, like 12 years later, and we're looking to see, being older, sometimes you write yourself off. Does he still have what it takes? So it gets to the point, and he, in a 3-month training block, has managed to, well, they believe, or they've said in this documentary, that within 3 weeks he was back to his full capacity like he was when he was still training in the Olympics, with 3 weeks of enhancements in a training protocol where he was back up to training twice a day, etc., and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, long and short of it, he goes for the attempt and he ends up missing it, right? But I think what is to be said with this, let's see if we can try and get his weight from when he was back in the day. So let me see. So back in the day, right? So when he's been weighing in for these feats before, according to Wikipedia, he would sit around 94 kilos. So he was a heavier guy, but being at 252 pounds, the mass that is on that man's body is what's holding him back. And I think a lot of people just think, well, surely the bigger the muscles, the more powerful they can become, but it's still weight that needs to be shifted through. That's why, to me, like, it's pretty impressive when the hybrid guys that really get into the quick paces of running, the guys that are over like 90 kilos, that's pretty impressive to be 90 kilos and still run a sub 20 minute 5K or a 60-minute 5K. I think Hunter McIntyre runs a crazy 5K time, like at 15:40 or 16 minutes. So you got all these a variety of disadvantages when you are heavier. The record that he missed was he was way off. It was 2 seconds slower than this record back in 2009, right? So I'm thinking to myself, where are they getting at with this documentary? Because straight away it doesn't necessarily paint a good picture. Like, if you bring performance enhancement drugs into the sport of Olympics, you're going to have this teething issue where the first block of training and the first attempt, you're going to have a lot of people that end up missing the mark, this was a slower swim than what he's done 12 years prior. However, it's a learning curve. So there's a part of this where this is so new that I think it's really, I do believe there's going to be a a future split where the enhanced games has the ability to take over the current Olympics, just because the what they're highlighting through these through this journey. Anyway, the second part of this documentary is probably where it makes more sense, where we had an athlete who's still in the sport of swimming, still actively competing in the Olympics and the national level, etc., etc. A guy named Christian Gokolemev, again, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So anyway, he goes from a what's he go from? He goes from a 21.44 from his best record. So this guy's best time on the 50-meter freestyle race was 21 minutes and 44 seconds, right? So that's him at his peak. That was in 2018. So still, it doesn't seem like a lot, but half a second way off where the record holder is. And what's interesting to point out here, this is someone who's actively shown up every single year, looking to be their fastest, looking to train as hard as they can to output their best performance. So 2018 seemed to be his cap, and he was finishing about 5th in terms of the rankings of the best, I guess, freestyle swimmers, 50-meter freestyle swimmers in the tested Olympic category, if you want to call it that. So he makes a decision to jump over and be one of the first athletes that are actively competing in the Olympics or in from a national level who are getting tested, and made this decision to retire from that federation and move over to the Enhanced Olympics. So through this process, I think they give him a 3-month training protocol as well. But what's interesting is he's about 4 or 5 weeks into this, and the same day that James tries to make the attempt, he goes for it as well, and he ends up swimming he ends up beating the record in one of the training swims, which then gets everybody hyped up. Everyone's like, oh shit, this is possible. No one's beaten this record in such a long time. We have the ability to really make a good stab at this. So anyway, it goes through his training block, very similar, getting tested. From a physical standpoint, it doesn't look like he gains as much mass at all. So it'd be really interesting to sit down with the guys and go, right, what was the difference in terms of the protocol that you were giving them? Where do you start? Like, how do you go through all this? Everyone's going to be individualized, or have an individualized approach to how they respond to certain things. It's the same with food, it's the same with training, it's the same with just any lifestyle factors. And I would imagine there might have been some tweaks made in terms of the performance enhancement he was given. But I'm a big believer that these guys who came over to this sport haven't taken anything before, because they were so, not anti it, but so dedicated towards their sport to begin with. I think James's story in one hand is like he tried and tried and tried, and the idea came up with that, and he's like, no way, like you could give drugs to college athletes, they still wouldn't beat me in my prime. What you should be doing is giving it to those athletes or Olympic athletes who are at their prime. So you're taking the genetic top 0.1% of individuals for that sport, and then you're giving them performance enhancement drugs. It's like I guess in a way there's a comparison here to draw to the strong women, right? So the strong, like the strong men competing, the women who show up to that. There's always an argument that but these women are so much stronger than all these guys, and it's like but that's all relative to where they're at. The strongest man is different to the strongest woman. There is the different capabilities to what they can output, and that's just a very distinct genetic advantage that the man would have over the woman in that situation, because of just the size, the mass, the genetics that play a part. That's why the whole transgender thing's a bit of a fucking grey area, because if you have a woman who's transitioned to a guy, they're at a disadvantage. But if you've had a guy who's transitioned to a woman, then they're actually at more of an advantage, because they have years of experience of living life as a male first. Anyway, digressing a little bit. So, where was I going with this point? So James in that circumstance was someone who was like, let me give it a try. I've been out the game. I'm happy to get back in the game. Let's see how good I do. Done pretty well. Blew up in terms of his size. Competed at 20 kilos by the looks of it, heavier than where he would normally compete at, and still put out a relatively decent time at 23 seconds. So 2 seconds slower, which is a big difference in the sprint, a massive difference in the sprinting world. You then have Christian, who breaks it in a training, like rehearsal, if you want to call it that, and then goes in for the official attempt. And long story short on this, beats it by 2 milliseconds. So the record was 20.91 seconds, and he got 20.89, right? So not much at all. However, he beat it nonetheless. Now, this is where the controversy is starting, because it's like he got several attempts. He's not competing with other people. So the argument here is that there's not the game day nerves, the game day hype, a crowd, a bunch of other athletes in the water at the same time. This was like almost the perfect conditions to create a world record beating. However, on the flip side of that, it was only 3 months of being on performance enhancements, and he goes from his best time ever at 21.44 to 20.89. So he shaves a second, more or less a whole second off his training from his best ever attempt to where he's at, right? Where he's currently at through a 12-week cycle, if you want to call it that. That to me is quite fascinating. And again, this guy's 31 years old. So the boundaries of what's going to be able to be pushed through this enhanced games is very, very interesting. I recommend everybody goes watches it, because it's a fascinating documentary. Now, a couple of things to highlight here. So I've already touched on it. You can't just give drugs to anyone. They're going to be an Olympic athlete. There is still a lot of dedication. There's a lot of time. There's a lot of sacrifice, a lot of effort. A lot of things need to be dialed in. When you take performance enhancement drugs, yes, you can get away with more, but that doesn't make you a top level athlete. So the idea behind the enhanced games isn't to go wave a sort of green flag that, yes, it's okay to take steroids and that sort of stuff. I actually think it's the opposite. It's going, right, look, we are going to introduce this, but this is for the top 1% or 0.1% of those who want to break world records. What is the human potential in a variety of these different sports when we include the pharmaceuticals that we have tons of research on, tons of data on, and can see these physical improvements? Now, with every cause, there's always a bit of a downplay, and this is the only argument I'll compare this to is these sports aren't healthy. So if you have an Olympic swimmer, an Olympic rower, and a sprinter, a weightlifter, a strongman, a bodybuilder, they are so caught up in being the best at that one element that it almost makes the other elements that they're missing out on, like they're missing out in this overall picture of health, right? Health and fitness to me is more about being able to live strong quality of life, a longer quality of life, and a sort of, I guess, a healthier lifespan, if you want to call it that. Not giving into the things like what happens through as we age, like our cancers or degeneration of our muscles or bones, etc. Health and fitness combats that and gives us more ability and more freedom, or more quality of movement, if we do it right. Now, if all you do is swim, or if all you do is sprint, or if all you do is train to be the best at that sport, you do leave a lot on the table. Because these guys are training twice a day, they're training, everything's dialed in. It's almost like the competitive bodybuilder, like every meal is prepped. And it's not necessarily a lifestyle that the average person like you and I would want to commit to, would want to sign up for. But then that is the trade-off of being the best in the world at something. So regardless of is it healthy or is it not healthy, it's already not so healthy. And yes, there's an argument to be said that it then enhances that because you're bringing drugs into the mix of that. But at the same time, it's been done in the right manner. And at the end of the day, there'll be the audience will dictate what they want to see. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Big up to Christian Golo. I think it's Golomiev, if that's how you pronounce it, and also James Magnussen, who both put themselves out there. Like, it's pretty to be the first to go at this. Like, you're either praised or you have a lot of hate, and there's going to be in fact, there already is. There's a lot of disruption coming from those athletes who are natural in their sport, or say they're natural in their sport, already kicking up a fuss. Okay, let's get into the main arguments. Now, if you're watching this, you're wondering, why the hell is Dale wearing a sleeveless tank top? Well, that's because I am enhanced. No, I'm not. I'm not actually anymore. I know I've been very open about taking testosterone and that in the past, but I've been off it for quite some time now. And I'm going to share wee updates on what happens with that over the next couple of months. Getting some blood work done, and I want to do the full completion of it before I bring it up in the podcast. But it's because I'm looking wham. Nah, really, I spilt coffee down my t-shirt and I've only got a tank top left. Anyway, let's move on. Arguments against enhanced Olympics. One of the most obvious ones, the health risk concern. So obviously PEDs do carry health risk, right? If you use anything and if misuse anything, then this is where you can have a variety of complications to your health and your risk with that. This is probably one of the most interesting points on how well the enhanced games stay true to their mission, which is to make sure that every athlete that does come on board is treated fairly and treated with the number one priority that their health matters first, right? So making sure that the right checkups are being done, making sure the right use of drugs have been done, etc., etc. Now they're only using drugs that this is the whole interesting part with this. The only drugs that are being allowed to be used is the ones that have been passed in terms of the FDA regulations and all that sort of stuff. But there's a bunch of drugs out there that bodybuilders take, and I would dare say other athletes take on a day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year basis that aren't quite FDA approved, but it has so much anecdotal data and backing from people's experiences that it's kind of thrown into the mix. That's where these dangers come from, because it's like, where are you buying it from? Making sure it's safe. That's always an argument that people end up making. But typically speaking, like where most labs come from on the quote unquote black market, although it isn't regulated, like they still do a pretty good job for holding a quality standard, simply because there is a Reddit article, or it used to be bodybuilding.com back in the day, but there is a 5-star rating basically of experiences, and you can sort of Google those experiences pretty quickly to see if the mass majority are saying or swear by it, or it's a crap product. If it's someone that's trying to make a quick buck and cheap out on the type of product that they're releasing, then quite quickly they're getting slated in forums, and that is one of the biggest shifts when it comes to these. I guess I'll call them bodybuilding drugs, because well, athletes do use them as well. So that is obviously the main one. I want to know how they're going to keep up the standard, because it's a lot of money to pay for someone to get the blood work done regularly, have health checkups, etc. Not saying it's impossible, but I guess the category of or maybe the standards to get people into that world would have to be quite a strong vetting process. But again, here's where the issue is for me. Will you have athletes that do their own PED research and take their own or make their own PED protocol up to get into the enhanced Olympics? How do you regulate that? How do you minimize the impact that someone has on their health by doing that? Because all they care about is, obviously there's a big cash prize, and I didn't mention that. It was $1 million that guy won for breaking that record. So there's a large incentive to get paid better. And if we know like history, like people do some shady shit when money's on the line, and the reputation of being the best or the fastest athlete in the world. When it comes down to that, that's a very hard thing to regulate, because even in the bodybuilding space, like there's a lot of deaths, and a lot of deaths will happen for a variety of reasons. But people are pushing the boundaries of what can be done in terms of like adding volume and size onto their body. And I think there's like an unwritten rule that so many people have to pass away that almost that standard gets recreated itself, if that makes sense. But with the enhanced Olympics being so new, I think you'll have a lot of people that will push those boundaries just to make the cut and get into the world of the enhanced Olympic sport, where you get your backing when it comes to the right test, etc., etc. Because that's another thing to consider here. Okay, probably the most second argument against this is the undermining integrity, I guess we'll call this part, and also natural talent. I think it's very unfair to say, well, let's be honest, like if someone is going, right now, like I value my health and I want to be the best athlete possible at my natural potential, then cool. Because you have this split in bodybuilding, as I said. You have people who choose to go into the untapped, capped market of taking as many performance enhancements as you like. It's all about who can be the most defined, the most balanced, the biggest, the most shredded. Like there's a variety of different categories in the bodybuilding space. And you do have that in the natural space as well. But the natural has more limitations. And you have athletes that when they start finding their love for the workouts or the sport that they want to compete in, they have a decision to make now. And that's the main argument against that. Natural bodybuilders don't necessarily, I think some of them do throw shade over to the the bodybuilders who are enhanced, but it's almost like they shrug it off. It's like, well, we're two completely different categories. And I think that's the most important part here. The enhanced game should be its own category itself. It should be in its own world where it's like comparing badminton to volleyball. Yes, there's a net in the middle, but it's two completely different sports. So just like we have female categories and male categories, I think with enhanced games, we should have like the enhanced should be seen in a different lens, a different category altogether. And if people want to choose to join that, then that's their choice. But the mainstream media trying to tear this image down, I think is quite interesting. I understand why. Like mainstream media, when it came to bodybuilding, when it comes to steroids, they always over glorify, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. But in reality, nobody ever talks about the impact of drink, right? Alcohol kills more people than steroids. Paracetamol kills more people than steroids. The number of people that take steroids and die from it compared to a variety of other things, steroids ranks very low on the list, but there's always an agenda. It's a very taboo subject to talk about, which is why it's almost frowned upon. But we're coming into an era where it's almost accepted. Back when I started lifting, fake natties were everywhere. And there's still an element of fake natties out there where somebody claims that they're natural, but they are taking performance enhancement drugs. But now the cool thing to do is, oh, yo, bro, I'm in TRT. Like, I'm Mr. TRT, bro. It's like 400 milligrams of test every week isn't a TRT, mate. Like, you can kid yourself on. But that's like the new sort of new thing to do. It's like, yeah, I'm on steroids, but I don't take much of it. And I get it. Like, I understand the argument, but it all comes down to perception. But because it's more accepted now, you have people that openly talk about it. And I think that's a very good thing, because you now have bodybuilders who love the sport of bodybuilding and are competing in bodybuilding, but doing it in a healthier manner than what they would have had to do when they kept their cards close to their chest. So I know tons of guys, and it was even myself in my kind of early 20s, where I didn't want to tell anyone I was on it because I was embarrassed that I would get judged for it. But at the same time, I was sort of looking at forums and try to take advice from random people online instead of being open and finding someone in my own network that I could speak about with it. So talking about it is certainly going to be better. The only concern that I guess everyone has is, once we lift the veil to say, right, here is the enhanced category, do you have people who have, like, some of these Olympic athletes, what do? They're competing from such a young age. So then do we have a world where we can't regulate kids and late teenagers start jumping on PEDs because their dream is to be the fastest man alive? Like, you can't knock that kid's dream of trying to be that, but then you're setting a different standard and putting on different pressures to go, look, if you want to be the fastest man alive, then look, we need to take performance enhancement drugs. So then there's a predicament that something could happen 10, 15 years down the line, and it could be because they end up taking some of these compounds. But you never really know. You can have the most ideal circumstances in the world, and life can still throw a shitball your way. So again, how is that going to mitigate the downturn, or the I guess the fallout that some kids, where they're looking at these athletes? Like, I know if I was in my 20s and I seen the physique that James Magnuson, James Magnuson had, I'd be like, I want to be a swimmer, man. That guy who's jacked, what is he taking? I'll take that. So we're very impressionable, particularly guys growing up, where it's always about, like, what gets the most attraction, like what gets the most comments, what gets the most status. And this is where it becomes a very grey area. And again, the main theme here is always going to go back to, how do you qualify for the enhanced games, right? So you had it's an Australian founder. He was flown over to America for his camp, right? And that's one guy. So that's a very expensive process for one person. When you have so many different people competing across multiple different countries, there's going to be an unfair access to who has performance enhancement drugs and who doesn't. Like, Western society, even what we have here in the UK, is very different to what they have in America, etc., etc. So again, it all comes back to that. How are you regulating and how are you standardizing the approach before you get to the stage of the enhanced games? Like, what is the qualifier? Like, is it like CrossFit, where you video yourself and the best times then get in? Or is it something where you need to go to something like a nationals? Or do we have these mini hubs where there is still access to health checks, etc., etc.? But if you're going to pay, like, you can pay, what would I pay for my most recent blood work? £200, £300 a month just to get your bloods done. Olympic athletes already aren't paid much, if any, whatsoever. They're usually working another job, albeit it may be their dream. it's not gonna end well, is it? It's got a strong possibility that that will lead to saving a couple of bucks because it's like, well, I feel okay. I know this compound works because so many people say it does work. Okay, so pivoting to arguments for it, I think there has to be more transparency, and I touched on it earlier where back in the day, bodybuilders were taking performance enhancement drugs, but they would get their supplement deal. And it'd be like, yeah, this was the supplement I was taking to get me this jacked, which then it sent the sales for that supplement company through the roof. But in reality, you're lying. You're lying to your audience. And there's a bit of that, well, there's a lot of this that still happens in today's world of social media. It's evolved into a different format. So bringing enhanced games in, I think it's going to be very interesting because here's a guy, right? This is a very interesting fact that you have someone who has a record since 2009. No one's been able to beat it. Now, on one hand, they used to wear the suits, okay? So the suits made they called it what was it? I wrote it down. Yeah, they called it the super suit. It was basically a leotard and it allowed them to go faster through the water. So when they've recreated this, they've gave this Christian Gavilan, they've gave this guy Christian and James these suits to imitate what the world record was broken in and see if they can do it. Now, James doesn't end up doing it because he gains so much mass, but Christian does. But he only does it by 0.2 seconds, or 0.02 seconds, should I say. Is there an argument here that these guys who currently hold world records prior to 2010, where we didn't have as much testing or we didn't have as much regulation, were they're enhanced? Now, I don't want to take this away because it's so hard. Like, you just hope that everyone has a bit of integrity within them to say, yeah, I took stuff or I didn't take stuff. But when reputation's on the line, when money's on the line, when sponsorship deals are on the line, people lie. And that's a real shitty thing about the world that we live in, that it's all driven through, well, I'm not going to get my paycheck this month if I tell the truth of what I'm doing. And then that eats away at someone as well. And this is why the mental health side of things is also another important conversation to have, because there is a lot of challenges with people holding that information to themselves. They then have a question of their own character, etc., etc. Okay, the argument number 2, which is a very interesting one, because where the bodybuilding space has probably allowed us to get more research and more antidote on what things work and what things don't, the same thinking will happen here if it's more regulated. Allowing PEDs could actually accelerate research in medicine, genetics, and physiology. I can't even say the word. But essentially, broaden our horizons, getting more data on what things can be enhanced. And it will most likely could carry over to us living longer as a population. That is also another talking point in the space, that we're trying to find ways where we do live longer. And sadly enough, people are living longer, but their quality of life doesn't necessarily mean that they're being able to truly live, because they're bedbound, they're hospitalised, etc., etc. So that's an interesting point. And again, yeah, it makes sense. Like, rather than it being this taboo subject, let's not make it necessarily mainstream, but let's bring it into the mix and find out the different talking points and the different testing points where, oh, this is interesting when an athlete's doing X, Y, and Z. Look what happens to their blood work, and allows them to scale. But it does give, like, the Olympic athletes are almost like the guinea pig trials, isn't it? So again, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that one turns out. Another one, entertainment value. I think that's pretty obvious. We want to see the best of the best. We want to see the freaks of nature. We want to see what is the human capabilities, like what is our true potential. Can we run the 100 meters in 5 seconds? What would that look like? Can we have man vs animals where we are outpacing animals? Can we do a 5K in under 10 minutes? Which I don't think we're far off. Does the 5-minute mile, which was such a hard feat to hit, like so many people are doing it now, can we do a 1-minute mile? Like the speed. And I guess if you're a big superhero fan like me, like, can we become Superman? Can we have those powers where we just break the barriers of the genetic ceiling cap that we've all got? That's where life is going to get interesting. And they're already talking about some compounds that are going to come to market where we have certain mechanisms in our body that stops us from gaining muscle, for example. And if you've seen the cow that is it, what is it they give the cow? I can't remember the compound, but they give this cow that genetically modifies that ceiling cap of muscle, and it just the cow blows up. It's a jacked as fuck cow, and those sorts of compounds are going to get brought into like human trials, where we were going to have access to this. And it's going to be very interesting, where we will have a pill, we will have a drug that we can take, and it means that you don't have to do very much to be in the gym and get jacked. And I think this is going to come with its own complications. It's for another episode that we talk about this sort of stuff. But again, it's another food for thought. Where does the advancements and where does it stop? But I guess time will tell. Now, I think the most important fact here is it's probably going to address the doping culture that's already going on in the Olympics. And there's no word of a lie that some countries are always winning gold medals and some countries aren't. And yes, there's an element of training. Yes, there's an element of diet, nutrition, lifestyle, environment. All these things play a factor. But to say that not any athlete is taking any performance enhancement drugs is bullshit. I think we just need to be more open, and we just need to separate them, have categories for, have categories against, because then there's not necessarily a debate. I think you'll still have people who look to cheat because winning a gold medal is the most important thing for them. But at the end of the day, I think the time will tell, and us as the consumers will be able to dictate where this ends up going. So final thoughts on this. I must admit, I like the idea, I do, but there is a lot of things that I'd like to see how they end up managing and regulate those that look to qualify to get into the Enhanced Olympics, because I think that's where there's a grey area. That's where there's potential risk to an individual's health, because the most important step is getting in there, and they'll do that by no means necessary. I don't think it's going to be, like, let's be honest, like, if you watch the 100-metre relay or the 100-metre sprint race or whatever, at any category when it comes to Olympics, you don't automatically go, or most of us don't go, that looks so cool, I'm going to try it. Well, sorry, most of us go, that looks so cool, I'm going to try that. But none of us are going, that looks so cool, I'm going to start pumping myself full of PEDs and I'm going to try and beat that record. That's where it's going to be very different. And performance enhancement drugs alone, without all these factors of genetics, of the dedication, of the training, of the coach, the dietitian, the years of sacrifice, the years of experience, all of those pillars absolutely matter. Performance enhancement drugs is making the marginal improvement. And I think this proves the point that that record that was held in 2009, if legit, this man has only been able to beat it by 0.02 seconds. And it makes it a very strong argument that it's not the be all and end all. We are going to see more records break, and that makes it cool. But let's see it'll be very interesting to see where the sport goes. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Comment below this video. What do you think is the future for the Olympics and the Enhanced Olympics? Do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing? Does it question the... here's an argument, actually, that I'll finish a point on. Someone said, well, why don't you just let them wear flippers? And I think it's all down to, like, well, if we know there's compounds out there that can physically enhance our performance, and we are doing a sport or a feat where it requires solely on outputting our best performance, why wouldn't we take that? And you might be thinking, well, what do you mean? So creatine, for example, could fall into that category. Supplements, like we've engineered these things to make life easier for ourselves. So yes, the label of steroid may seem big and scary, but to me, it's like, well, if we've got so much research on how to do it safely, just like if I eat 1,000 bananas, I'll probably die. If I drink 1,000 gallons of water, I will die. If I take too much steroids, I potentially may die. So where do you draw the line? Because to me, it's the same. It's the same. We've created protein powders, we've created creatine, and albeit, yes, there's a marginal difference of how much creatine you would have to be a detriment on your health to compared to some of the PEDs that people are taking. However, it's still, in my eyes, within the same category. So why not use things that we have a ton of research on, we have a ton of backing on? There's no sort of other agenda other than, here, this is going to be the best performance for you. And sadly, those who want to be the fastest and the best on earth, I think they surveyed a bunch of Olympians on, that was 2018 maybe, and a staggering 80% of them said they would die in the next 10 years if it meant they got a gold medal at the 2018 Olympics. That is mental, right? So the last thing they're thinking about is the longevity of their health. That's going to probably be where the sacrifice comes from. Who's prepared to put themselves on the line? And And arguably, they're already putting their health at risk by competing in the sport to begin with, because there's a lot of sacrifice that is needed for it. So yeah, that wraps up today's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed that. It was a wee bit of a tangent. I'm not sure how well this will come out. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Be sure to check me out on Instagram at Coach Crossar if you don't already follow me. And if you haven't left a 5-star rating on Spotify, I would love if you could support the show by leaving a 5-star rating. Completely free to do. And if you're watching on YouTube, so consider subscribing. But at the very least, leave a wee like and comment below this video on what you think. And with that being said, I will see you guys on the next one.